So I am Gayatri Mendana, and on behalf of Symbiosis, I welcome both of you all and or everyone in the audience to this afternoon's sessions of the Symbiosis Literary Festival 2021. This morning, of course, we had the pleasure of listening to a very stimulating discussion on the book, The Great Hindu Civilization, Achievement, Neglect, Bias, and the Way Forward by Ambassador Pawan Verma. The session was moderated expertly by Professor Radhika Seshan. This was followed, of course, by the delightful panel discussion on finding new audiences, the role of the internet in indie music. And there, of course, we gained insights from musician and entrepreneur Tushar Mathur, as well as Sanyantan Sharad from the internationally recognized soul band Easy Wanderlings. This discussion was moderated by Feathers in Space, the indie pop duo Radhika and Darren, who we are proud to say are also alumni of Symbiosis. And on that note, we have the pleasure to welcome our next speaker, who is also an alumnus of Symbiosis, Mr. Dhruv Sehgal. Many of us in the audience, of course, will know him for his role as creator, head writer, and actor in Little Things, the hit YouTube series which was picked up by Netflix and recently ran its final season. Mr. Sehgal is a founding member of Pocket Aces Pictures Private Limited. He has also been awarded the Golden Gateway Dimensions Mumbai Award at the Mumbai Film Festival in 2015 for his short film, Kunal. I welcome Mr. Sehgal to this session.
Thank you.
Mr. Dhruv Sehgal, of course, will be in conversation with Mr. Ajit Duara, who is a professor at the Symbiosis Center for Media and Communication. Mr. Duara is a film critic and screenwriter known for his work on A Century of Oil, The Blind Camel, and Words from the Mist. He completed his BA in English at St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and his Masters of Fine Arts in Film Scholarship and Criticism at Columbia University, New York. This discussion will be on the representation of modern love in the digital age. The discussion will take place for around 30 minutes, following which the moderator will welcome questions from the audience. So anyone from the audience, if there's any question that you have at that point, feel free to raise your virtual hand and we will invite you to unmute yourself and ask your question. Alternatively, feel free to pose your question directly to our moderator using the chat box function, right? So I now invite Mr. Ajit Duara to take over.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to Dhruv Sehgal. Dhruv and I go back a long way. I taught him when he was at Symbiosis. He was a very good student. I'm not just saying that because I have to. It's a public forum. But I'd like to begin asking you questions. I've seen the series, Little Things, very enjoyable. And it's short and it's enjoyable. And we were talking the other day and you said that from studies it's been found that the age group that watches Little Things is between 16 and 35. And as I gather, they're largely English speaking because the language is largely English, middle class or upper middle class. And because it's about a live-in couple, dare I say liberal, live-in couple. And it's in Mumbai. It's set in urban Mumbai. And it's about how they make, it's not about how they woo each other because it's much more about how they live together and make their adjustments in a live-in relationship and so on. Now this, your talk is of course about representations of love in the digital age. But of course there have been, we don't like to accept it. We think digital age is everything, but there have been representations of love in previous ages, in the literary age and in the cinema age, television age. And so many authors, going back, Mirza Ghalib and cinema, Gulbat and so on. And my question to you is, what do you perceive as the difference between the representation of love in this digital age and previous eras, going back, maybe even to painting, representation of love in paintings, literature, of course. What do you see as the essential difference?
Well, sir, well, one of the difference that I feel is that the notion of romanticism has kind of changed. It's the idea of soulmates, the idea of infidelity being the worst thing ever. You know, the idea that if you find love, you will always have. You've got the key to happiness and joy. You know, that those typical idea of the the basics of romanticism, I think that has changed somehow. Love, and it may seem a little boring, but I don't think it's boring. But it's got this idea of, but is it practical? This notion of practicality with love, or practicality within love, has sort of been has started being exercised in our narratives, in the digital age. And even in the books that have done recently very well, Normal People by Sally Rooney and other such books, where the idea of love has to go hand in hand with the idea of the life that you want to live beyond love, as opposed to making love the center focus of all your existence. you know and because love is looked at as something which, or life is looked at as something which can transcend from love also. So it's beautiful because you can experience the goodness of love in different activities. You may be a golfer, or you may be a accountant, but just being in a relationship as an accountant, and how love has an impact on that person's story, is sort of interesting. And that is what we tend to see in most of our modern age Hindi or Bombay stories of love. It's a balance of life and romance.
Yeah, sort of like the difference between Devdas and Dev D.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. That's a perfectly, yeah, I would like to believe that's the best example.
So I would like to ask you, were you conscious? I mean, on one sense, you're an artist, so you're writing, right? You want to have a good narrative, you want to have good cast, actors, representing what the kind of conversations you would like a boy and a girl to have, and so on. So one is the narrative aspect. Were you also conscious when you were doing that, you wanted to represent this in the digital age, that they would be talking to each other, both conversationally and also through the social media, which is that putting their photos up on Facebook and people reacting to it, and therefore their love, sort of, which is private, sort of becomes a little public. Were you conscious of that aspect? Because that representation.
Yeah, I was, because I don't have a, what do I say? My pool of stories is very limited, because my life experience are extremely limited, and more that I see myself living in Bombay, the kind of conversations that I have, the kind of people that I interact with, they're all similar, you know. So it's not about courage. I did not have the imagination, and I did not want to be dishonest with the characters that I was writing. I wanted to write them in the way that I've experienced life firsthand, and as a viewer, just seeing things between my friends and between my colleagues. So I was conscious. So because of that, social media is such an important part of our life, more than important, such a regular part of our life, that I could not talk about it. But then what we did was that in the first season we had more of it, but in the second we reduced it. In the third we reduced it more, but we used it in a different way, that how it can disturb the relationship, because you say things on social media before you even tell the other person. So suddenly this idea of is this not, why would you not tell me first, how it can make us feel small. So the different aspects of social media was interesting to us, that in the first season, because it's about them in their honeymoon phase, it's treated like that. Second season is treated differently, and third is treated differently. And I don't think there's much about it in the fourth season.
And when you were representing, these characters, were you sort of consciously wanting to have a particular kind of background, a particular kind of apartment that they would be sharing with their shared stuff in the apartment? Your character you play is interested in football and interested in other areas, and she is interested in different things. So when you were designing the set, right, were you conscious that in any live-in relationships, you have spaces, different spaces, and you share your spaces, and that can lead to kind of conflicts and
yeah
stuff like that?
Yeah, no, sadly, I did not have such conversations with my production designers and my directors and cameraman and even my producers. I would have loved to. And because the show has this quality of seeming so everyday, that there was a risk of it being of it coming across as something which is not aspirational in its appearance also, so the producers were very I wouldn't say obsessed, but they were very sure of the fact that they wanted the house to look better than they can actually afford in real life. They wanted it to have this sense of glossiness about it. And even after I disagreed with them so much, but you can only, in the field that we are, you have to choose your battles. So I remember in the second season, I actually carried my steel plates with me. I said, I don't want to eat in your expensive looking China crockery. I would much rather eat in my steel plates. I would much rather have a steel glass. But then but the conversations that the aspirational value goes down. So you want, which is a fairly Bollywood way of looking at life.
So you don't get the advertisements that they are looking for, is it? That's your aspirational level goes down.
Yeah, I mean, it can't look it can't look mundane. It has to look beautiful at the cost of it even seem like reality. Because ideally, these two would not be living in Bandra or Powai. They would be living in a 1 BHK in Malad, probably in a building which doesn't have a lift and which has water for a certain hours. So if I have to be honest to that, then the dynamics changes a lot.
That's right.
And then your question becomes much more valid, that in a small house, when you're always in each other's faces, and yet you want space, but yet you want to be with each other, then those questions arise. But in the canvas that I was presented, those questions, I mean, there's no scope for those questions, because it has to look, for a lack of better word, some form of premiumness needs to be there.
The other thing, of course, we just tend to think of the digital age as social media and so on. But it happens to be also the age where both men and women are working. So the couple that you are a working couple, right? So they have their priorities. And I think on work, you leave her and you go somewhere else. And there's this huge separation. And that's very strenuous on the relationship. So this notion of living together where both partners are working, how did it play on your writing of the script and the representation of love, basically? How does a working couple? What's the difference between love between working couple and a housewife and a working man, for instance, or a stay-at-home man and a working wife? How is it different? How does love change?
I mean, for me, it was just simply that, if you have more safety nets than just each other, then you can actually maybe experience life in a slightly more dynamic and more in a more holistic manner. And so because in the third season, when they separate and he goes his way, she goes her way, because they have to work and they have to be in a long distance relationship, it actually opens the window for them, where they question so who am I in this relationship? And what do I want from life? And can I actually find happiness without you? And if I do, does that mean I don't love you? Or does that mean that I'm actually an evolved person who can have various sources of happiness? So for me to push the characters towards these questions, this idea of separation was very important. And this idea of separation acted as a conflict, you know, that suddenly you feel that you feel independent because you work, you pay your rent, but you don't feel emotionally independent because you're anchored in someone else's feelings. But this person is unavailable, you know. So then it forces you to ask yourself, then who am I? You know, and I find this to be an interesting conversations between you know, in so many of these Bombay house parties that I go to, where you always find there's a bit of edge between people who work, because it's, I don't want to say it's a competition, but there is a 2% of this, you know, there's this edge to it, irrespective whether they work together, whether they don't work together. And I've also been in relationships where I am working and my partner is not working, or where the partner is working and I'm not working. So even that has its edge. The whole idea was to show a friction of uh, to show friction on this side also, to not show them as they're too sort, that they're sorted and they operate very individually, you know. The Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned the word identity. And what is the fear of losing one's identity? I mean, especially with women, but men as well, losing their identity in a very close, very tight relationship in love, because they're both working and they're living together and they have their spaces in the apartments and so on. This fear of identity, is it what leads people to go out of the relationship, so losing their identity? I mean, just want your take on it.
I don't know. I mean, you know, I mean, I keep asking my partner, who even you've taught, because we were batchmates, you
Yeah.
know, and we got married recently, 3 4 months back, and and the families were talking and everything, and you know, the idea of what marriage is became the central focus of so many conversations between the two families and us, that I sort of started examining. So if this is what marriage is to them, then what is the idea of beauty, you know? And do people like my parents, do they have an access to beauty as we feel, as we perceive beauty, you know, this sort of submission of ego and submission of self? So maybe for me, I guess the identity comes from the fact that if you have things which can give you an access to beauty, you know, and it could just be, you know, even supporting a football club and having this sort of this release of emotions. So maybe if you fear that, you know, your avenues of this beauty, or your avenues of this sort of release, or of this thing is going away, and maybe that is the insecurity, that you don't you'll fall less in love, you'll fall less in love with life, you know. And these ideas of identity, or these avenues, should, they're not always the prettiest, you know. Someone who works for a company knowing that the company is not a good company, but his idea of identity is attached to that, you know. So I guess we live in an age of too much information, so we kind of need to always hold on to some bit of information, and it kind of gets lost. So, which is why for people like me, you know, our idea of job is very important, work is very important, relationships are very important. Um, Family less, because we don't live with our families. The idea of having pets is important, because I guess, I mean, including myself in the picture, that you fear that what are you if not these things, you know.
So is there fear
Because
of losing your soul, in a sense? I mean, that's maybe a little too dramatic, but losing the soul of a relationship, which probably was there in a pre-digital age, where you were just two individuals, and not connected to the public through the digital media, or to your friends through the digital media? Is there any sort of fear of that?
Maybe, but I don't see that it only affecting your romantic relationship. I generally feel that it affects the relationship that you have with life. Like, I'm more distracted than I've ever been. I'm less focused than I've ever been, and I've had the worst attention span that I've ever had in my life. You know, and so would not separate. I would not separate my romantic love, and I think that also has had an impact because of all of this. The fact that you don't that whenever you're fighting, you're thinking about yourself as opposed to the other person. This idea of submission, this idea of hearing or just plain listening, I think that has anyway been a little screwed up in the times that we live in. So everything is slightly you have to struggle more in order to listen.
I also want to talk to you about the conversations in your series, the way you write the conversations, all the dialogues. They seem to work very well, and they're interactive. They're not separate dialogues. They gel together. So I wanted to ask you, were you influenced by any particular film directors, films, because you did cinema, in writing of the dialogues?
Yeah. Well, because this is the first thing that I ever wrote, the first season. So my earlier influences were Woody Allen, big influence. His works like Annie Hall, Manhattan, Hannah and her sisters. So many of his works, big influence. Then
Vicky Barcelona, what was it?
Vicky Cristina Barcelona.
I was thinking of that.
Yeah, that, and a lot of stand-up comedians, because they have this way of telling a story which sort of makes it conversational in its tone. So the likes of Louis C.K. or who else? Aziz, Larry David, Seinfeld. Then there's this TV show, HBO TV show called Girls by Lena Dunham. So she was a very, very big influence.
Okay.
Yeah. Those guys.
Okay. Now, I just one sort of final question I'd like to ask you. After this experience of representing love in the digital age through your series, did you find, it's been about 4 or 5 years, I think, am I right? So did you find any kind of change taking place in your own persona? Because you see yourself on the screen, the computer screen or the TV screen, and you see yourself as a person, who you are. So did you feel any difference do you feel any difference after, because it's still going on, after 4 or 5 years of doing this? Has the experience of working so hard on this, has it sort of changed your relationship with yourself in terms of identity and with other people as well? What is the connection between this and your personal life, in a sense? Has it changed anything?
Well, honestly, I think about this question a lot, and more so because I don't have an exact answer for it, because it's so recent that I feel I don't have an objectivity about this whole experience. But there are a couple of things that I've learned during the course of this. One is that however things are, if there is some sort of a center focus of life, it revolves around love and the idea that people want to have faith in it. So that has been a big learning, because I've got messages from all over the world, from people of different age groups, of nationality, and the kind of messages that I've got makes me genuinely feel that this is something that is just the core emotional. This is the most basic. This is the denominator. One is that, and the second thing that it has done to me personally, it's made me given me a sense of identity as a writer, because I genuinely believe that before this I was not a writer. I was somebody who was I used to love watching stories and reading stories, but this has given me a relationship with the act of writing. and the craft of writing. And it has made me realize how difficult it is to tell a great story, and yet how enjoyable and full of torture is this journey. And before 5 years, I didn't have this sort of perspective, that what it, and so that my relationship with my work is what it's given me personally.
And what do you see as the difference, in a sense, between because it's a work of collaboration. What you're doing is a work of the cinematographers,
Yeah.
actors, and so many things, and your own perception of what you want to say in the series.
Yeah.
How do you bridge that, or do you find that it widens or it becomes closer? What you want to say, and what all your collaborators, including your producers, want you to say, like you mentioned about?
It gets easier after every season, but also what happens that people have their own agendas, and I would like to believe that only the writer is truly honest to his story, because a lot of times, and without wanting to blame any director or a sound recordist or a musician, there is a sense of insecurity which exists in this particular field.
Yeah.
So that filter of risk, and the filter of, oh, I'm being given a chance, so let me do something more than I'm required, or something different as I'm. So that sort of purity towards that sort of unconditional love that you should have towards a particular story, it's sort of it's I'm not saying it lacks, but it's a very difficult profession, so it always gets masked with some form of insecurity, that if the DOP feels, if I shoot it like this is how it's supposed to be shot, but it probably doesn't look nice, so should I shoot it like this? But that changes the story a bit. But the distance from this to this is quite a lot, and it's full of insecurities. It's full of, I've been given this chance, let me make a good show out of this, or let me let this be a good showcase of my skill. But I think that is like 5 to 10%, but 90% of the times people genuinely are trying to tell the story that they've read.
Okay, you have a very large fan base, so I think we should allow for questions at this point. No. This is what I feel. I think a lot of people will be wanting to ask you questions. You said, yeah. You spoke about the you spoke about the glossiness. This is from Sarah Marwa. Okay, you spoke about the glossiness in regard to the apartment that was used to shoot, but even though that may have come off to be too good to be true for the audiences, do you think that a layer of glossiness can be compromised without affecting the show or any show in general? Or is that a place where actors will have to compromise a sense of reality? That's the question from Sarah.
Do you think that layer of glossiness can be compromised without affecting the show?
The show or any show in general?
Or is that a place where actors will have to compromise?
You can see it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a little different for actors because they still have things within their control.
Yeah.
But more than compromise, it's about what kind of effect do you want? What kind of story do you want to tell, and how you want to tell? And a lot of times that comes with an agenda. Sometimes writers also have agendas. Sometimes directors have their own agendas. The idea is that, I mean, glossy or not glossy, compromise or not compromise, it's mainly about, trying to tell a story which makes the audience want to care. And if you belong to the real world of business and money and stakes are high, then you can't do it in complete, you can't be totally absolute with it. You'll have to compromise on like, if it's music, then maybe a bit of the music, or if it's the art, if it's the costume, then you have to compromise on that. Like, I carry my own clothes on set because I say, let me just wear the clothes that I'm wearing. So most of the clothes are mine own. But not everybody is supposed to think like that also. But I mean, I personally have an agenda, so similarly other people have an agenda. So it's a tricky one.
It's a tricky one. Yes, it is. Production is tricky business. Mayank Ahuja, okay? He says, you spoke about how the concept of love has changed. Can you comment on it with reference to avoidant and anxious attachment styles in individuals, and how the same can be displayed in our stories, films? So kind of like ghosting or obsession. I think that's what he means.
Yeah, I mean, I know about this. There are three or four kinds of attachment styles. Yeah, I would. It's because I don't know much about it. I can only speak on behalf of little things. I think whatever attachment style they fall into, it's a similar attachment style. So, which is why I think they're able to fix things. They're able to not sort of torture each other. They're not able to go through crazy amounts of upheavals. So for them, it's pretty straightforward. But there's so many of these Bollywood films where this idea of toxic love is romanticized, and it's not really shown the way it should be seen. And I mean, I just believe that you have to be careful about what kind of love are you trying to showcase, because it's an emotion that everybody wants to latch on to.
Yeah. Okay. Arjesh Gupta, was it ever awkward or difficult for you to write and act your own lines? That's an interesting question.
It was awkward and difficult when you've written something with a particular thought in your mind and you go on set and it is not the same thought. But what also happened, at least in the last season, because I didn't write it, I felt that not having written the show kind of freed me from this responsibility that actually nobody had given me, of just being meticulous about few things. So I was just able to enjoy the act of acting more, because I didn't have I wasn't thinking about anything else other than acting. So yeah.
Okay. The next question is Dr. Ruchi Jagi. How will you reflect on the idea of love versus romance in storytelling?
I mean, romance is fun, I guess. Love is full of hundreds of other things. And I would say the first season of Little Things is romance, but the rest of the show is about love. All the other seasons are about love. So, yeah.
Okay. Devansh Bose, in regards to Little Things, are you really a Liverpool fan, or was it just for the show? Come on, you have to be honest there.
No, I made the biggest blunder of my life by choosing to be a Liverpool fan. And honestly, sir, I did it only because of they have a club anthem which says "You'll never walk alone," and I thought it fit well with the ethos of the show.
That you'll never walk alone.
Yeah.
Okay.
The fans sing it to the team, and the team sort of reciprocates in with their performances. And I thought it matches the ethos of the show. I didn't know the show was going to blow up in this way, so I was stuck with it. So with every subsequent season, the reference of Liverpool has decreased.
Okay. Now this is Chehak Agarwal. Hello, sir. I'm really intrigued to know that what was your journey after Symbiosis? Did you actually plan out things that one day you would want to step into acting and filmmaking, or you had some other plans for your future? Basically, how Dhruv Sehgal became Dhruv Sehgal. Oh. I also wanted to ask you that question.
I genuinely never ever. I don't think in Bombay you can think very meticulously. But no, what I did was that I chose the options that were laid in front of me, and I always went with the one where I thought that could be interesting and that can offer me a chance of learning, even if it meant that I will not get to do what I wanted to do. But if it provided me a chance of more learning, then I would do that. Case in point being, I could have joined a theater group and done backstage and production work for maybe 2 years.
Yeah.
Or I could have joined a documentary filmmaker and learned the act of storytelling, editing, direction. So, and actually have an experience out of this industry per se. So I went with the documentary filmmaker, and so I worked with this filmmaker called J.D. Verma for 5-6 years. We worked on 2 documentaries. I was his associate director, editor, and cameraman, and also the sound guy, because it was a very, very small unit, 3 people. And I did documentaries for 5 years. Then I took a break for half a year. And then my school senior started this company called Pocket Aces. Then I joined them for 3 years, where we did all these shows and the videos that you saw for Filter Copy. And then I left them. And then since then, I've just been working on my own.
I also remember when you were in college, you were acting and writing a lot of the films. So that was very clear at that stage. That was your inclination and your aptitude for.
Yeah. I mean, it generally doesn't feel like work. There are so many days where I am on set and I'm like, wow, somebody's paying me for this.
Okay, now, Aditi V, to everyone. How easy or difficult was it for you to write such a narrative and a take on modern love relationships, considering how love as a concept is highly subjective to every individual? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, that's an interesting. Well, I mean, one way that I always maintained with all my other writers who I was heading was that, you have to approach the show with two principles, which is truth and empathy. Let's not gloss over those things, and let's treat them as human beings with their flaws. And yes, we can't really go deep, dark, and ugly with these characters, but let's still have this idea of truth and empathy in place, which is why all the other seasons of Little Things, there is a fair bit of friction as opposed to the first one. So one is that to treat your characters as human beings, and the second thing is that I still feel that the core idea of relationship, which is the need to be understood, the desire to feel a sense of freedom in your relationship, the chance of making mistakes and not being punished, all the core principles of relationships. I don't think they are I think they're quite common and popular, and we played on that. So it kind of did connect with a lot of people, because the core values of love pretty much are similar for most people, I guess, if not for all.
The next question is by Sheikh Zayed bin Nasir. Did acting without being the writer yourself help you evolve more as the character?
Did acting without being the writer?
Were you acting without being the writer in any? I think he mentions what you said.
Yeah, it did, because I used to enter the set without worrying too much. Oh, how is this looking? What is the frame like? Suddenly my main objective, which should have been there earlier also, it was just purely focusing on the craft of acting. So it kind of did free me up a bit.
In your mind, you were more free.
Yeah.
Okay. Pranati DVLS. Ever since 2016, how has the show helped you to grow? And how did you come up with the idea of writing the story for Little Things? Was it any personal incident, or did it just happen?
So the concept is not mine, actually. The producers, we made these two videos which went viral which featured Mithla and me. So the producers said that, who my boss is, and they were like, hey, you should make a show with the two of you and restrict it to the house majorly, because we don't have the budgets, and just write something for us. So the concept was this, but the tonality, the characters, the story, and the arcs, seasonal arcs and character arcs are all mine. So the concept was this. And how did I come up with it? I don't know, man. I was never really crazy about your typical 3-act structures in that form, or something which is too Bollywood. I always liked things which were rooted in reality. And that also came because I did documentaries for 5-6 years. So I found a lot of joy in nonfiction, and I wanted to have an element of that in the show, which is why, in the show, there's a lot of fumbling also. We are not pronouncing words in the right way, and we make mistakes on camera deliberately. And because I don't know, it used to, it's something that always I've sort of been excited about.
Interesting. From the idea of the documentary to this, your transition, and how it affected the dialogue and the way you spoke. Not because the documentary doesn't. It needs reality, so that effect.
Yeah.
So this is now Aditi Ramchandran. What caught your keen eye for little things?
This only. And, one of my biggest influences, which I forgot to mention, is Chekhov. I've always been fascinated by this everydayness of life, this slice of life, kind of a storytelling. I don't know exactly why is that the case, but I was never able to kind of, I wouldn't say not enjoy, but I was never able to relate to to your typical Bollywood storytelling. I would always be more excited by, say, the works of a Devaka Banerjee, things which echoed life, but with a certain kind of a lens. And yeah, I mean, college had a big part to play in it, in the films that we saw. And yeah, I don't know, just something about the nuances of life always make me excited. So hence that became Little Things, because I wanted to not tell a story about the first heartbreak or the first time, they had sex, or the first time they wanted to speak to each other's parents about marriage. It was more about the everydayness of life and finding beauty and depth in that.
Okay. Chehak Agarwal, did you ever face the very spoken issue about nepotism or favoritism in the industry? If yes, then how did you cope with it?
No, I've never. I'm too small here. I'm too much on the outskirts of the film industry to face any of this. I haven't faced it ever, but that doesn't mean that I will not probably face it. I may face it, I may not face it, but I've seen it around me. So it's not happened to me, but I've seen it happen with people.
Okay. Anuya Kontheti, I hope I pronounced it correctly. What is your take on the hypocrisy that people still have on topics like live-in relationships? Because it's still a massive challenge for a couple to find a place in India without getting married. That's why it was an interesting question. I was wondering, in that, do the society chairman or secretary, because they live together, are there scenes of them protesting?
No, they aren't. They're not. Never, never. Not because I thought that this doesn't happen, because I know it happens a lot. But somehow I wanted the world to give them a good playing field, that now you live your life. But I mean, yeah, it happens, I guess. And I remember that when the first season came out, so many people told me and messaged me that this is not even real. This doesn't happen. And where does this happen? But I saw it all around me in Bombay. But I also admit that we are a very, very small minority like that. But yeah.
Okay. The next one is Vibhuti Garg. Does the love and support of fans get overwhelming at times? Also, how do you deal with the pressure of keeping up with their expectations?
I never felt that, and not just me, even the team never felt that, because like I kept saying, that our only responsibility was towards these characters, and that we wanted to approach them with this sense of truth, reality, and empathy. So our only responsibility was that, and making a season better than the previous one. And even if we would not have got this kind of love, I think that ambition would have still been the same.
Okay. Devansh Bose, how does your writing process go about? Also, how do you combat procrastination? That's interesting.
And how do I tell you? I really, really struggle. I'm going to turn my camera to show you my writing space. So I've got a whiteboard here and I write there. I've got a diary here, because if I start writing on my laptop, then I can't write stuff because I'm very, very distracted. I've got at least 6 diaries here for each film and each concept. And yet, even after being thorough with all my preparations, I can't find to not defeat this feeling of some sort of a mental paralysis or some form of low attention span. But yeah, I think all of us will get there, because we are thinking about it all the time. So we should get there.
I suppose deadlines also are there, so that keeps
you that
going. Deadlines. Preetha Banerjee, do you think there should be a last season showcasing last season showcasing a live-in relationship turning into a marital, it's moving all the time, excuse me. Do you think there should be a last season showcasing a live-in relationship turning into a marital relationship and the hardships attached to that?
You know, this season told me how obsessed even young India is with the idea of marriage. And for a lot of us, this marriage is like the pinnacle of happiness. And, because so everybody just wanted them to get married. And I don't think there should be that, because it feels kind of against the grain of the show. Had I been given the chance to write the last season, I would have done something very different with it. But maybe that's for another thing.
Gayatri ma'am, are we running out of time?
Right. I was just texting you, in fact, on chat to say that I think we don't have any time for any further questions. But the session was so well received. We still have questions coming in. We still have people raising their hands. So yes, Anita ma'am, go ahead.
With your permission and with Ajit's permission, I'd like to convey a message to Dhruv. Dhruv, hi, I'm Anita Patilkar from Symbiosis.
Hello, ma'am.
Delighted to hear you, and some of our students have been texting me that they're thrilled. I think Aditi has her hand up because she's a great fan. Maybe Aditi, you can just switch your video on so Dhruv can see you. But I actually wanted to convey a message from Dr. Vidya Yerodekar, the Pro-Chancellor of Symbiosis International University. And she, for some reason, isn't able to join in and talk to you. But she watches your show. She loves the characters, and Mithila Palper as well. She finds your acting really, really good, and she wanted to congratulate you and tell you that
Thank you.
she's
Thank
very
you.
fond and she likes the show. She finds it great.
Please convey my regards to her.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. So thank you both, Dhruv Sehgal and Ajit Duara, for this wonderful discussion. I think the questions were also so carefully crafted, and Mr. Sehgal's responses have also been so insightful. And as we all know, Little Things is extremely popular. So it's such a delightful series. It's so relatable. My husband and I have binge watched it. And I think today, both of us listening in have had the pleasure of hearing all the thought that went behind it. And, its creation and its representation of love. So thank you. So a big thank you to the both of you for this afternoon session.
Thank you,
Thank you for having me. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Right. I would also like to thank all the members of our audience for joining in on a Sunday afternoon and participating in this literary festival.